Hello, San Francisco. Welcome to this panel. Thank you over there. I see you. My name is Blake Buettner. I'm the managing editor of Worn and Wound. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being at the Wind Up Watch Fair in San Francisco. We appreciate each and every one of you. It's been an incredible experience to get to talk to a lot of you, nerd out about watches with a lot of you. I'm sure it's the same with each of my distinguished guests up here. I'm really excited about the panel today. Thank you to Fortis. We are going to start out with Andreas from Fortis. Thank you for being here. We've got Bradley Price from Autodromo. We've got Dana Lee of Tell the Time. Fabulous. I want to get a bit of a wrist check going here. You can each kind of say a few words about the watch on your wrist, and if you want to give yourself a brief introduction, then we can roll into our topic today. Andreas, let's start with you.
All right. So yeah, I'm Andreas. Hi. I'm working for the marketing team in Grenchen for Fortis. And today I wear my Stratoliner Supernova, which is one of 13 truly space-tested watches that's been on a rocket in space.
Awesome. Love those. I still am very keen on that dial. If you haven't checked this out yet, definitely go up to the Fortis booth and check them out. Bradley, what are you rocking?
Hi, I'm Bradley Price. I'm the founder of Autodromo. I am wearing my Group C watch today, which is our digital watch that we released about a month and a half ago. It's definitely worth checking out up close because it has a lot of unique details and material finishing and so on that it's really cool in person to check it out.
Yeah, it really is. Those watches turned out beautifully. Particularly like the yellow Cerakote case.
Yeah, we have
Very
one
unique.
version that's yellow Cerakote.
Yeah, no, they turned out beautifully. Dana, I see something beautiful on you. What are you wearing?
Yes, so I am wearing a 1970s Rolex GMT, a root beer specifically in two-tone. It was my first, as I call it, my first big girl purchase after I'd been working for a few years, and it's my good luck charm, so I have it here with me today.
All right, excellent.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about, just in general, kind of broadly, watches in how we categorize them, genres, go anything, do everything, go everywhere, do, gotta, is that what it is? Go anywhere, do anything? I think that's what it is. Watches are kind of like a big thing right now. However, I think we traditionally kind of like placing watches into neat categories. Categories like divers, categories like pilot watches. You mentioned watches that are tested in space. We'll get into a little bit of that later, but what are brands trying to convey by placing their watches into these rigid categories when most of the people that are buying them are not pilots, are not divers, maybe not astronauts, maybe not race car drivers or pilots? What are brands trying to convey with these genres?
It's me first. Huh?
You first.
All right. I think what we want to do is actually, we don't want to categorize the stuff. We just want to test the stuff. And we said, okay, the best way to test things is to do the most rigorous test to make sure it's going to work on Earth. And the most rigorous test is obviously not on Earth. So that's why we're going to take them to space, to see whether the movement is capable of taking all of this. The case, the screws, everything needs to be kind of fixed and stick to the watch itself so that you actually can rely on it wherever you take it. So that's our main goal, making luxury like rigged tool watches at the end of the day.
And you explicitly have a campaign that Fortis has run that says, in bold letters, this is not a pilot's watch. Tell us about this campaign and the meaning behind it.
Well, the idea was basically to tell the people, yes, we work with professionals. Everything we do is designed and manufactured with professionals like pilots, like astronauts, or like, for example, with the Swedish Space Corporation who are building rockets. So the idea was, on the other hand, to say, but you don't need to be a pilot. You're a pilot in your life. So, and you're gonna hit door angles and stuff like that. That's what you hit. You're not, flying with.
So you're just leaning right into it, recognizing, all right, we know that you're not all astronauts or whatever. Use the watch how you're going to use it. Rest assured that it's been tested to X degree. Make of it what you will, kind of a thing.
Exactly, and people, I guess, love good stories.
Yeah, okay. Do you think there's any value into assigning terms like pilot watch or diver's watch because of the kind of underlying connotations to like the aesthetic codes that we associate with these terms. I think when we hear pilot watch, dive watch, kind of a certain style of watch comes to mind. Is there any value in that? And Bradley, like you kind of, you don't really adhere to any of these in a traditional sense.
Well, I mean, historically, these categories have to do with feature sets that would allow this person to perform the act of diving or flying or whatever it is. And so those codes, those visual codes, are also a result of that feature set, right? So having a tachymeter scale on a chronograph so you can measure how fast an object is going, right, for example. It's interesting because to me, like when my work, I feel that because of the fact that we have ubiquitous timing in our daily life with our phones and smartwatches and all this other stuff, the wristwatch has been kind of freed and unmoored from its historical purpose of primarily being the only way that you could tell time. Because, really people really cared back in the 50s and 60s that you needed to have a reliable watch because that was the only, you didn't know what time it was. You couldn't look at your phone or like a million other places, right? And it's not that accuracy doesn't matter anymore, but what I'm saying is that it's become more of a talisman object that's about emotional meaning and signifier to other people about what's important to you. And so I find it very liberating that it's readability, like, again, it's not that readability doesn't matter or feature sets don't matter, but I find that, with my work, I'm willing to bend those things to suit the aesthetic or storytelling mission of the piece. So that's kind of my approach to it, is like bending the rules a bit or bending the readability a bit to get across what I want to get across.
So I think when we hear these terms, I think it kind of primes your brain to think about a certain feature set or a certain look. How does this manifest in the fashion world, Dana?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that I think about is, in general, a lot of our lives and kind of the way we live our lives has changed so much, right? There's kind of this blending. It's no longer just very linear, like you're going very dressy, or you are, wearing more tactical gear if you're diving, racing, etc. And we almost kind of go for these day to night looks. Like we want that convenience, we want that versatility now. And the first example I think of was always like Carhartt, for example. Streetwear has now, it's really everywhere in streetwear. It was designed originally for functionality, like for tactical, for railroad workers, and now it's made its way into everyday life because it's very functional, it's practical, and if you want something that's gonna hold up through the test of time, and it kind of translates in watches as well, right? Like, sure, we're not necessarily taking a dive watch diving, but we want that kind of aesthetic where we want something a little bit more sporty, and we want to see the time easily, for example. And, we want to know that it's going to be okay when we take it on vacation and, go sit by the pool. And again, you see people wearing their dress watches, dressing them down, right? That's also another big thing too. So I think this trend of kind of the blending of different categories, or even having consumers almost pick what they want to wear for the reasons that they want to wear it.
So I think, does it do kind of the industry a disservice by continuing to use kind of pretty rigid labels? Does it hold back creativity or advancement? I walk around here, I have a hard time saying, oh, that's this watch or that watch. I think brands should be thinking about, well, I'm going to make a diver or a pilot, but if they want to borrow from some of those aesthetic codes because the practical considerations are no longer like as important as they once were, but I mean, do they have value at all? Like, should they go by the wayside? Or should we just kind of acknowledge that straight up?
Well, I think the most important thing is that in terms of our brand is, what we want to do is, yes, we had an era of tool watches, and now it's the time to redefine it. The idea to bring luxury back down to earth, to make it like an everyday use, daily rocker, but still luxury timepiece. I guess that's what we do. And it's not, of course, about being a pilot or a diver. I mean, nobody needs a helium valve. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous at the end of the day. So, and I think it's exactly like that. We've designed a watch, the Stratoliner, that is made for the space tourist. I guess no one on the show is having a ticket for Virgin Galactic here. So, but at the end of the day, the story is what counts, you know, and the vision behind it. And if the design is good, if the quality is good, the components you use are good, you create something for a lifetime, and you need a story that someone loves to talk about to his friends, why he bought the watch.
Yeah, I know. I love the idea of kind of thinking about the experiences that you want associated with these watches. Bradley, you take inspiration from a very specific realm. I don't want to say it's niche because it's not, obviously, the automotive space. But you still find a balance with your watches that appeal to people who are interested and knowledgeable in the automotive space, automotive enthusiasts, but also have an appeal to people who maybe, like, that's not a requisite to enjoying them, right? So I think broadly that applies to a lot of different things, but I think you've done it particularly well.
Yeah, I mean, I always try to put sort of Easter eggs that people who know stuff will get it. And it makes them really happy that they're seeing these like subtle things that they don't hit you over the head with their obviousness. That's why we've never really done. We did a little bit because we had to with Ford GT program, but we don't like put stripes down in the middle of our dial and stuff like that. That's just these like super obvious motorsport cues. I try to do things that are like, not the obvious thing. And that also enables people that are not car nuts to just say, well, that's just a really cool watch. I mean, this watch in particular, there's nothing inherently motorsport about it. It's inspired by the shape of a Group C car to some degree, but it's just as much, when people are coming up to me at the booth upstairs, they're like, this reminds me of something I would have wanted as a kid. And that, to me, that emotional response is really what I'm looking for with the customers. And if they get all the references that the box is like a turbofan wheel, that's additional icing on the cake. But fundamentally, I just want to trigger that delight and that emotional response of sort of familiarity. And to me, to just tie up my thought, like, I think that these traditional cues or traditional like features are a way of like allowing someone to hang their brain around what this thing is. Because if you take all those things away, it becomes a bit more nebulous. You're like, I don't know what the story is here. So by having some amount of traditional cues from a category, let's say, you allow someone to grab onto it mentally, and then they can be led into the story from there.
Kind of a starting point. Dana, do you have any stories like the watch that you're wearing and how you've kind of brought it into your own realm and made of it what you are, even though this has its own kind of unique history and why it exists and all that kind of stuff? You're obviously, I don't think, a pilot, but you've kind of made it, assigned a different kind of value to it and meaning to it. And I think a lot of us do that with the watches that we buy and appreciate every single day. So what has that meant for you with a watch like this?
Yeah, with this specific watch, I got it because I was traveling a lot for work at the time. In another life, I was a business consultant. So, I was constantly flying and really wanted to keep track of different time zones because I was typically traveling so far. And for me, I'm not a pilot by any means, but it almost kind of just evolved into a travel companion, really. Like, this is the watch I bring whenever I travel, whenever I'm going somewhere, I just naturally reach for it. And I love it because, sure, it borrows the pilot watch's aesthetic, but I can get the time on it incredibly easily, and I can keep track of the time at home to know, when you're looking at your calendar and you're trying to figure out what time zone people are scheduling meetings in, for example. Like, it's nice to kind of have that. So for me, it's really just about, again, kind of the journey that I'm taking with my watch almost, right? And I think we kind of spoke about this earlier, where watches have that aspirational aspect to them, right? They're part of our lives. They're living our moments with us, and you kind of form that bond with them through that.
Yeah, absolutely. The stories that we imbue with these things end up meaning the most. If watches had stories to tell, though, Andreas, I think your watches might have some pretty interesting stories to tell. Tell us about some of the extreme testing components and maybe some of the things that you've learned about your watches because of those extreme testing conditions that you put them through.
Well, I think first and foremost, you need to take it one step back and say, we want to build, let's say, the most robust tool watch in the world. And so that's what I mentioned earlier, is we have to find the most harsh testing in the world. So, and there's no better place to test watches than into space. Actually, everything we know nowadays derives actually from space testing. You know? So the idea is to find partners that can provide space services. So we've hooked up with the Swedish Space Corporation and a couple of others who can provide stratospheric balloons, rockets, even the complexity of building modules where you can do the setup in and stuff like that, because we cannot do that. And we need to have that done by professional space-going institutes. So the most crazy test we did lately was to put these 13 watches on a rocket that went up to 260 kilometers. And there were like 12 other experiments on board testing diabetes cure, or there was even an experiment from Costa Rica who have a virus for bananas, which is their most important export product. And you learn so many things about what's been done in space, and I think that kind of widens the horizon. And at the end of the day, for us, it's important to know, can they withstand that travel? So yeah, so in the first place we did on a stratospheric balloon, we tested the watch. We know they work in space, but you want to know what exactly happens in space, so you can kind of reiterate the test back in Grenchen, then build machines with those people, with those companies, to have an own test center, test lab that kind of makes every single watch kind of space-proof without, sending rockets to space.
No, I love this, and I love the stories, and I think you also have you've watches that have been developed for the training of living on Mars, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we've had this very special mission in Israel in 2021, where we developed a watch that can actually track the communication delay between Mars and Earth on a 10-minute average. So the analog astronauts who went out of the habitat actually can measure the communication. So when they send something to mission support, it takes 10 minutes time to get there and the 10 minutes back to get the answer. So they can track, did they receive it, whatever. So yeah, that's basically what we're doing there. We want to be the first boutique on Mars. That's the plan.
Okay. So what comes next? What's the next extreme testing that you have in mind?
We do work with the Swedish Space Corporation very closely right now. There's some other companies in the pipeline. But on the other hand, the idea to have that space-proofness needs to be proven over and over again, because, you know that the missions go further, deeper, far away, whatever. So we want to be part of this. We want to not be just like a watch they just take. We want to be the official timepiece for those astronauts, taikonauts, whatever they are, to make them have an instrument they can rely on wherever they are. The official cosmonaut was once used as a hammer on the ISS to kind of put in a bolt that was kind of needed fixing, So, that's how we point the space thing over and over again. Yeah.
No, it's an incredible story, and it's been fun to follow along with. And I'm sure I've said this before on the stage, maybe even I'm a big proponent of watches are what you make of them. And these are the kind of things that I think deepen the experience. Bradley, have any of your watches been tested in space?
No, but I do have a 3.5-year-old daughter. Okay. And she asked for a Group
Harsh
C.
conditions.
And we're going to see some testing going on with the Group C when she gets it for her birthday. So I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay. I love this, and I'm one of those guys that still enjoys the practical components of a watch. I've got what some people might call kind of boring tool watches, but I don't care. I like that element of them, and I'm I'm the first to admit I'm not like a diver, and I'm not like climbing up Mount Everest or anything
Sure.
like that. But there's still something that appeals to me about the kind of
No, yeah.
practical element of the watch.
I have always worn my watches in race cars, and we have customers that do. I have used it to time like a stint, for example. If you're like driving for 30 minutes and you have a driver change, like I have used our chronographs for timing that. And it was very satisfying that it could read it. Like, actually really hard to read a watch in a moving race car. And actually, years ago when I did my watch with Vic Elford, who was a famous Porsche racing driver, I did ask him questions about how he used his watch at the time, because obviously all these drivers wore chronographs in the 60s. One of the things that people don't know is that Joe Siffert, who is one of the other factory drivers, was selling all these watches to these guys because he talked to Jack Hoyer and was like basically a sales rep, because he was like kind of, in Vic's words, he was a wheeler dealer, and he liked to sell stuff. He grew up poor. He wanted to make money wherever he could, and drivers were not well paid back then. So he was selling these Hoyer, chronographs to all the other drivers. And I said, well, what did you do with them? How did you actually use them? He goes, oh, we didn't really time our laps. I mean, it's impossible. I said, so what did you? And he said, well, you could time when you needed to get into the car or get out.
The same stuff that all of us time with our chronographs,
yeah.
right?
So don't let anybody tell you that you need a racing chronograph to time your own lap while you're driving, because you could time someone else if you're standing at the side of the track, and you could time what they're doing.
The image of Nina Rindt, the trackside timing Johan, I think immediately comes to mind. An impossibly fashionable Nina Rindt when she's got the watch on, of course, that has taken on her name, and she's got the stopwatch and jotting down the times.
Yeah.
I love those kind of stories, though. And
it was really interesting.
And hearing that, now I don't feel so bad. Like these aren't being used exactly for some of these extreme, even by doing them.
I always wanted to know, like, did they actually use the chronograph in the race car ever? Because it's a really valid question. It's like you have to take your hand off the steering wheel to activate it, and I mean, you have to be able to read it while you're like this. So I mean, that was a valid question, and that was an interesting answer from him.
I love it. No, I mean, it gets it back into the watches are what we make of them, regardless of what they're labeled as or their original intent is. And so, and I think we all kind of feel about the same way. And I know there's a lot of watches here that don't quite fit into those kind of neat categories, but they offer a lot of really incredible experiences at any rate. And so, do you have any like extreme watches that were really kind of, this is this kind of a watch, but I really like using it for this kind of a thing?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't go out and do anything really crazy with my watches, honestly. I mean, I'm also not like skydiving or doing anything crazy. I have skydived before, but not with a watch.
You have before? That's pretty impressive.
Before.
Okay.
I have.
Were you wearing a watch?
I was not. Okay. I was very afraid it was going to fly off my hand. Okay. So I left it back at the hotel where I was staying. But I do use my chronographs to time my cooking quite a bit, actually. So a lot of the times where I don't necessarily can't find my phone at home sometimes, or I just like want some time away from the screen, I'll use the chronograph to cook with, because sometimes I'm also, if I'm cooking a bunch of different things at the same time, I'll use my phone timer for one, I'll use my chronograph.
And it gives you an excuse to use it, right?
Exactly.
And those buttons are pretty fun to press.
No, 100%. 100%. And I mean, it's not particularly exciting, but I think there is a real practical use for it. And I think, again, with a lot of bringing it back to the topic of, watch categories, again, I think our lives have really just evolved so far beyond, like, we have this one single hobby, or this is kind of the way we live our life. Like, a lot of us here, I would feel, are like, we're multi-talented, right? Like, we cook, we run, some of us are pro divers, right? And so, like, how can you find a watch that kind of speaks to that in the way you live your life?
And at the end of the day, it's okay with saying, like, I find dive watches handsome.
Yeah.
it's a good look. A pilot watch,
Yeah.
Whatever. I think that's okay. As Zach always says, we've got our phones in our pockets to tell the time, so
Exactly.
we shouldn't take ourselves too seriously. Well, you guys both have a couple of awesome chronographs at your booths. If you guys haven't checked them out, definitely swing by there. Dana, where can people find more of you?
Yes, so my site is teletimewatches.com. I am also on Instagram at tellthetime.
Awesome. Andrea and Fortis, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate
pleasure.
you.
Thanks
Appreciate
for
you
having
being a part of Wind Up. Bradley, love seeing you here and love having you here.
My
as
pleasure.
Always.
Thank you.
Appreciate thank you all for being here. We really appreciate each of you. If you have any questions, if you want to talk about your experiences with watches, come find us afterwards. We'd love to chat with you about it. All right, until next time, take care, guys.